The imaging process in making and keeping friends. How do you conduct your life so that people are drawn to you? How do you get people to have a favorable attitude toward you? How do you persuade people to love you or, perhaps just as important, like you? These are important questions for every one of us. William James, the great psychologist, said that one of the deepest drives in human nature is the desire to be appreciated, which is just another way of saying that everyone wants to be liked. We all have this desire, and yet you know as well as I do that some people have more success in this area than others. These people seem to win friends easily and readily. They are popular. They are considered attractive, or charming, or helpful, or likable. People in trouble turn to them. Even their in-laws like them. But there are other individuals who are not like that. Something seems to block them off from other people. And other people from them. They don't attract, they repel. And this is often a sad and painful thing, because they feel isolated and friendless without quite knowing why. I was giving a talk not long ago at a convention of men who were executives in the automotive industry. At the luncheon preceding my speech, I was seated at a table with several men. One was a man of considerable intellectual brilliance. His mind was sharp and perceptive, his conversation incisive and stimulating. Yet there was a certain something that kept me from really being drawn to him. Later I asked one of his associates about him. "Poor Bill," the associate said. "He is without question one of the most able men I've ever done business with. But not long ago he came to me and said, 'Charlie, would you please tell me something? Why is it people don't like me? I seem to get just so close to them and then a barrier goes up that I cannot penetrate. What is the trouble?' 'And what did you tell him?' I asked. He was silent for a moment. 'I really didn't tell him anything,' he said at last, 'because I didn't know how. But did you happen to notice those 2 scholastic achievement keys hanging from his watch chain?' I think somehow, unconsciously perhaps, Bill projects the impression that he considers himself superior to the person he's dealing with. It is a very subtle thing, but it is there. Instead of saying, 'I care about you,' something in his manner says, 'I think I'm a little smarter than you.' And maybe he is. But all the same, it turns people off. 'You should have told him what you just told me,' I commented. 'You would have been doing him a favor. He might have put those academic keys away and started projecting a different image. So if you ever get another opening.' 'You're right,' he said thoughtfully. 'I will keep it in mind. Suppose you feel that someone dislikes you and that therefore you have grounds for disliking him. What should you do about it? The first and most advisable thing to do is take a long, dispassionate look at yourself. 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ put the essence of the whole thing into one short sentence: you must love your neighbor as yourself. Are you hypersensitive, suspicious, quarrelsome, wary, hostile, aggressive, contentious? You will never like your neighbor, because you don't like yourself. Are you quick-tempered, jealous, demanding, complaining? Same problem. If you want to associate on a good, friendly, normal, creative level with other people, you have to do a job on yourself. Until you like yourself. Imaging can help, because you can zero in on a character flaw and then picture yourself acting in the opposite manner. Take anger, for example. An extremely unpleasant characteristic, almost guaranteed to cause you to lose friends and make enemies. Suppose you know you have a quick temper. A short fuse, as they say. When something ignites it, hold a picture in your mind of yourself calmly extinguishing it. Or if you can't completely extinguish it, at least delay it. Very often the best cure for anger is delay. Some years ago, I was asked to serve on a committee that was set up to study ways in which religious organizations could further the cause of world peace. A meeting was held, and it was certainly the most unpeaceful committee meeting I have ever attended. Several of the members had very firm ideas about the subject of peace, and if those ideas weren't accepted, they got very hostile about it. It became a superheated meeting. Voices were raised. Tables were pounded. Then one man rose and, with an air of great deliberation, took off his jacket, undid his tie, and lay down on a couch that was there in the office. Discussion ceased abruptly as we all stared at the man. Somebody asked, "What's the matter? Aren't you feeling well?" "I'm feeling fine," the man said. "I just noticed I was getting mad, that's all. And I have found that it is difficult to get mad lying down." He went on to give a little lecture on how keeping the body relaxed keeps emotions under control. He spoke in a very low voice. "Speak up," somebody said. "We can't hear what you are saying." "That is the trouble with this meeting," the man on the couch said. "Too much speaking up too loudly. You can't argue in a whisper." Then he drew attention to his hands, which were resting limply with fingers spread and relaxed. He said, "I've noticed that when I get mad my fingers get tense, and before you know it I've clenched my fist. So I picture myself like this, with my fingers uncurled. With my fingers relaxed, it is very hard to get mad." Well, I never did forget that man. He imaged himself out of a state of hostility and aggressiveness, and he carried the rest of us right along with him. Another unlovely and unlovable quality is irritability, which often seems to be a combination of exasperation and impatience. The other day, while waiting to make a telephone call in a crowded airport where all the phones were in use, I noticed a distinguished-looking, silver-haired man in one of the booths, trying to put through a call. He got a busy signal half a dozen times. And what did this great executive do? He slammed the phone down so hard that it bounced off the hook and ricocheted around the booth on the end of its wire, an exhibition of plain, unadulterated infantilism. We're all subject to exasperating happenings, from a broken shoelace to a friend who forgets a lunch date with you. There is a text, the 21st chapter of Luke, verse 19, that I like to repeat to myself under such circumstances: "In your patience possess ye your souls." If you practice spiritual patience, you can rise above these inevitable annoyances. You can block them out, bring them under mental control. You have to decide who is going to call the shots, you or the annoyance. Patience through prayer and a quiet attitude is the best way. When someone rubs you the wrong way. What if some person rubs you the wrong way? Here again, it is possible to learn to have an objective, scientific, dispassionate attitude. If you practice the two principles of spiritual patience and objective observation when someone does something to annoy you, you are not going to become irritated or angry. You are going to react as a scientist. A scientist is an objective, disciplined person who wants to know the causes behind circumstances. He reacts dispassionately, that is, without heat. So, acting as a scientific observer of the person whose actions annoy you, you will say to yourself, "I wonder what emotional conflict he has? What trouble is there in his life? Is he driven by some frustration or defeat?" Your reaction will be scientific and objective rather than emotional. You may even find yourself trying to help him solve his problem instead of resenting him. I'll admit this requires greatness of spirit, because the natural tendency is to hit back. But it is a wonderfully satisfying experience when you have learned to study another person objectively and thereby avoid personal resentment. Suppose you're having a disagreement with your wife, as we all do from time to time. Suppose she is being a real problem, or so you think. Try sitting and looking at her in a calm and pensive manner. This may be difficult, because if she is very annoyed with you, she will say, "Why are you looking at me that way?" "I'm studying you," you will say. "You used to be the greatest, sweetest girl. You were always so kind to me, and I loved you for it. Now you are upset and irritable, and I'm wondering why. Maybe it is my fault. Perhaps I'm just no good." Do you know what she will do? She will start to defend you against yourself. "You're all right and I love you," she will firmly declare. So there you are, the situation has been eased. You have dealt with her on a basis of spiritual psychology instead of simply reacting emotionally to her emotional state. You will find that this principle holds true in dealing with your children, your business associates, and your friends in general. I will study this person objectively, you say to yourself when conflicts or difficulties arise. He has a soul, so I will treat him spiritually. You can get along with almost anybody, peacefully and without irritation, if you will refuse to be hurt and if you will look at the other person from a dispassionate and scientific point of view. A visitor once asked Robert E. Lee, the great Confederate leader, what he thought of a certain individual. "I think he is a very fine gentleman," Lee replied. "He goes around saying some very uncomplimentary things about you," the visitor told the general. "What do you think of that?" "You didn't ask me what he thought of me," Lee replied calmly. "You asked me what I thought of him." The great general was too big to stoop to pettiness. That is why even his adversaries admired and respected him. Love your enemies. Jesus Christ told us. Bless them, pray for them. Matthew 5 verse 44. It sounds hard. It is hard. But if you can bring yourself to do it, it will banish hate and anger from your heart and often turn an enemy into a friend. Christ is really telling us to let go of ill will, to image a reconciliation taking place. If you can force yourself to do this, the rewards are very great. I remember a big, rough, tough, aggressive businessman who came to me after church services one day and said he wanted to acquire the spiritual power I had been preaching about. It sounded good to him. How could he get it? I listed the conventional answers to such questions and he went away, saying he would do as I suggested. But a few weeks later he reappeared, saying that nothing worked. He prayed, he had read the Bible, he had cleaned up some dubious areas of his life, but he still had no feeling of spiritual power and he wanted to know what was wrong. This time I talked to him in depth, and gradually it became apparent that his mind was full of hate and resentment for some of his business competitors. He was a big man and it was a big hatred. As a spiritual doctor, I knew what he had to do if he wanted to have the power he was seeking, but I also knew that he was going to balk at the prescription, and he did. Our conversation went approximately like this: "There is an answer, if you want it and have what it takes to go for it," I said. "Of course I want it." "What is it?" "You have to love these competitors of yours." "What?" "You have to love them." "Are you crazy? Did you ever see those fellows?" "No, I never saw them." "But the Bible says you have to love your enemies." "That is asking too much. It's impossible." "I thought you wanted spiritual power." "I do." "I thought we agreed that I was the doctor." "You are." "All right, I prescribe that you love them." "How do I love them if I hate them?" "I'll tell you what to do, and it won't be easy. Every day, 3 times a day, you have to ask the Lord to help those fellows and love those fellows and give them a bigger year in business than you have yourself." "I refuse to do it," he shouted. Well, I told him, if you want to have spiritual power, you've got to do it. I knew one thing about this man: if he made a promise, he would keep it, and he finally assented grudgingly. About 10 days later, he came back and told me what had happened. "I went home," he said, "and tried to pray for those so-and-sos, and I just could not do it. When I got up the next morning I couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it at noontime. But that night I knew I had to do it. Or break my promise to you. So I knelt down and said, 'Lord, bless those fellows.' And I named each one. And give them a bigger business this year than you give me." Then I stopped and looked up and said, "Lord, don't pay any attention to me, I don't mean a word of it." I could hardly keep from laughing out loud. I knew the Lord must like a fellow like this one. "But," he went on, "I finally said, 'Okay, Lord, I don't mean it, but I wish you would make me mean it.' So I struggled on all week like that, and finally last night a wonderful thing happened. While I was praying, all of a sudden it seemed as if a great hand came down and took away from my mind this heavy weight that has been there, and I want to tell you that today I am bursting with happiness." Of course he was. He did what the Lord told us all to do, and the result was real and wonderful happiness. Help people to like themselves. That man finally made friends with himself. And when that happened, he could love his neighbor. So that is the first step in making friends and keeping them. Get yourself straightened out. And what is the second step? It is helping your neighbor think more highly of himself. If you can just do that, you will never have to look around for friends. They will come to you. They will flock to you. You will need a stick to keep them away. Lord Chesterfield, that wise Englishman, knew this. In his famous letters to his son, he said something like this: "My son, here is the way to get people to like you. Make every person like himself a little better, and I promise that he or she will like you very much." That is profoundly true. Do you remember that earlier in the book I told about the professor at college who reprimanded me so severely and told me to improve my performance? Why do I remember him after all these years and love him still, although I was angry at the time? Because he saw a better me inside me, and proceeded to drag it out. He made me perform better, and when I did, I liked myself better, and I came to love the man who was responsible, even though it was a rough process. Emerson put it well in one of his memorable sentences: "Our chief want in life is someone who shall make us do what we can." That is indeed the function of a friend. Do you lack friends? Take an acquaintance, or several acquaintances, study them a bit, then select their best attribute and praise them for it. This doesn't mean fulsome or insincere flattery. It means a fair and friendly recognition of something worthwhile in them. That recognition will increase their self-esteem. And they will eagerly give their friendship to the person who does that for them. Everywhere you go, you will find people who are not living up to the best in themselves. People love to have this best element recognized and coaxed out of them. Sometimes, to be sure, they resist. It is a paradox: they want the best drawn out of them and yet they don't. I see this quite often when I'm preaching, and what is preaching but an effort to draw the best out of people? Some members of the congregation come to church because they know they need to be improved, and yet they hold back as if saying, "Well, get it out of me if you can." Finally, if their lives are improved, it isn't the minister who does it. It is Jesus Christ, whose servant the minister tries to be. And that is one of the many reasons people love Jesus. He brings the best out of them and is therefore their best friend. Another simple but basic way to make friends is to help people, not just when they ask for help but also when you see that they need it. I remember reading a newspaper story about a filling station operator named Sam. With winter coming on, somebody sold Sam a snowplow, the kind you attach to the front of a car. When the first heavy snow came, he used it to clear the snow away from his gas pumps. It took only a few minutes. He looked across the street and saw a man's driveway all snowed in. The man was vainly trying to get his car out. Sam went over and cleaned his driveway. Then he went on to the next house. Soon he had cleaned out the driveways of 29 houses. Now where do you think all those people went the next time they needed gas? They went to see their friend Sam, of course. Later on, the story said, the Small Businessmen's Association had a meeting in Washington to study methods and techniques of successful salesmanship. They had heard about Sam, for by this time he was cleaning the driveways of several hundred homes each winter. Not only that, but anyone in the community who had a problem or wanted an errand done would call on Sam because he would take on anything from babysitting to delivering groceries to shut-ins. The Small Businessmen's Association heard that Sam was selling more gasoline than anyone in his area, so they asked him to come and give his magic formula. Sam, to their astonishment, simply told them he got his formula out of the Bible, where it says, "Love one another," John 15 verse 17. Indeed, that is the most practical, sensible, hard-headed advice in this world. Businessmen used to come around and complain to me about Christianity's being theoretical. It is theoretical, all right. It is the soundest kind of theory, because it works. I promise you that any business run by people who love their employees and love the people they serve, and who treat them all with loving kindness, will have black figures, not red ones, in its ledgers. It is a law as inexorable as the law of gravity. So there are really 4 steps you must take if you want to make friends and keep them. First, you must examine yourself and get rid of the characteristics that alienate other people. Second, you must make a conscious and deliberate effort to help other people find greater self-esteem. Third, you must go to their aid and assist them over the rough spots in the road of life. Fourth, and most important of all, you must love them, genuinely love them. People love you when you love them. Human beings always know when you love them. And they respond with love. That is the ultimate basis of friendship. That is what binds people together and holds them together. One of our most beloved entertainers, Will Rogers, used to say he never met a man he didn't like, which guaranteed him endless friends, because no one could be found who didn't like Will Rogers. I once knew a quiet and likable man named Charlie who ran a grocery store in Pawling, New York, the small town where Ruth and I own an old 1830 farmhouse. Pawling has a population of maybe 4,000 people. Charlie ran a chain grocery store for about 20 years, and then the company withdrew from the town. Charlie spoke to me and asked, "Do you think I could run a store on my own? I don't have much capital, but the company said I could have the equipment, and they would give me an inventory to start with." "Sure you can," I said. I knew that Charlie loved people, and that people loved him. So he took the store, and the day after it opened I went in, and Charlie and I went into one of the back rooms and sat there among the cracker barrels and cartons, and Charlie said, "I want to dedicate this store to God." So he and I had a prayer of dedication. Later, I used to watch him wait on people. One afternoon a woman came in looking tired and worn. Charlie said to her, "Mary, I'm glad you bought some of that cheese. That is a great New York State cheese, and I know what a good cook you are. Your husband and children are going to have a wonderful supper tonight. Macaroni and cheese cooked by loving hands, you can't beat that." The woman stood up straighter and a wonderful smile came over her face. She picked up her groceries and went out, strengthened by the knowledge that the man who had sold them to her was interested in her as a person. A year or two later one of those big, modern supermarkets opened up only a short distance from Charlie's little store. He asked me, "Do you think I can survive the competition from this big, new supermarket?" I said, "Just go on loving people, Charlie. You'll be all right." Well, he was. And when Charlie finally died, his was one of the biggest funerals Pawling ever saw. It seemed as though the whole town turned out to pay tribute to a quiet grocer who loved his fellow human beings. Never forget it. The way to friendship and the way to happiness is through the wisdom of the wisest man who ever lived, the man who said, "A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another." John 13 verse 34. Follow that principle and you will find fulfillment for one of the deepest needs of human nature, the desire to be esteemed and liked and loved.